Very, very interesting. And with that, we will move on to our next speaker, Julia Yusupova, who will be presenting Archetypal Astrology, Resonance and Revelations. So, Julia Yusupova is a PhD student in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She holds an MA from the same program and a BSc in Applied Chemistry and Biology. She has been published in the Journal of Conscious Evolution, Mindfield, the Bulletin of the Parapsychological Association, and has presented at many conferences, including several at LABRC, which is a great honor for us, Julia. 15 years ago, after predominantly clairvoyance, precognition, after learning how to meditate, she began to experience an abundance of intuitive phenomena, predominantly clairvoyance, precognition, and synchronicity. Since then, she has been studying these experiences phenomenologically and developing a thesis which integrates them with the modern class of electromagnetic theories in consciousness studies and the emerging science of biogeomagnetism. Throughout this time, an arts-based research practice on synchronicity had also grown itself, which now utilizes a novel method of collaging spontaneously captured photographic resemblances in synchronistic and archetypal phenomena. Julia resides in Toronto, but travels the world collecting stories and experiences that aid her research. So this is very exciting and looking forward to it. So over to you, Julia. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rula. Can you guys see the slides? Okay, so I'll jump right. So archetypal astrology is a discipline that was developed by Richard Tarnas. Back in the 70s, he compared thousands of historical events and personalities to astrological alignments in their charts and in the sky at those times of history. He found all kinds of correlations between astrology and personal and world events. Cosmos and Psyche is the book in which he presented this research. He also worked in close partnership with Stanislav Grof, who is the father of transpersonal psychology and holotropic breathwork. Many correlations were likewise found between between patients' transpersonal experiences and their astrological alignments and alignments in the sky at the time. Becca Tarnas is Richard's daughter, who's carrying on the tradition, teaching archetypal astrology. And all of these people are closely associated with my university, which is how I learned archetypal astrology myself. So the correlations that Tarnas found were not to astrological signs or houses, which are given importance in other types of astrology. Here the focus is specifically on planets. Tarnas studied traditional astrological texts from ancient Greece and Mesopotamia, as well as modern ones. He then summarized archetypal meanings traditionally associated with each planet. And this chart shows just a shortened version. Notice that the planets are further divided into personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal planets, as well as the luminaries, sun and moon. Archetypal astrology places the most importance on transpersonal planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which, unlike the personal planets, were all discovered in more modern times. These planets have the longest orbits around the sun, some lasting for hundreds of years, and hence finding historical correlations to their alignments becomes easier and more statistically significant. The transpersonal planets are, in a sense, more collectively potent. The way to read for meanings in archetypal astrology is in the combination of the archetypes between two or more planets. Additionally, you look at the specific angle formed between them. So the 5 major angles or aspects divide into hard aspects, which are considered to be more potent than the mellow, soft aspects. The hard aspect of the square, for example, is notoriously regarded as the most challenging one to deal with. The influence of the mathematical angle in all of these alignments most likely points to a connection of astrology to sacred geometry. So here's one condensed example of the kinds of correlations that Tarnas found. Alignments of Uranus and Pluto combine the qualities of revolutionary Uranus with the power and intensity of Pluto, thus creating rebellion and societal transformation on a collective scale. These are a handful of the time periods in history that had these world transits. So you can see there was the hippie revolution, labor and civil rights movements, women's and Black movements, slavery abolition movements, and various historical uprisings, which all began and took place during these times of Uranus-Pluto alignments. Another example is the Saturn-Pluto alignment, which is generally considered to be the toughest combination of the two planets, tying together Saturnian challenges with Pluto's intensity. Hence, many wars took place under these alignments. Also, epidemics and disease are connected to this as well. And actually, it's not included here, but COVID as well took place under a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Uranus-Neptune alignments combine mysticism and transcendence of Neptune with the awakening and insight of Uranus, creating periods of spiritual, intellectual, and artistic enlightenment. Again, just a few examples of the famous people that flourished in these periods, but there are so many more examples in Parnas's book that these lists don't do it any justice. In fact, each one of these planetary alignments and more constitute a full chapter of research details in the book. Now, looking at my own natal chart, archetypal astrology helped to point out a special connection that I have with the planet Pluto. For one, Pluto, which you see here circled in red, conjuncts my ascendant, and this traditionally means that this planet rules my core self and identity. Secondly, you see here in the lower left quadrant of my chart, it holds the majority of my planets, and the rest of them are actually at the top of my chart. So you see in the red arrow that I drew, it indicates the path that Pluto has traveled since the moment of my birth up to now. As it traveled this path, it met up and conjuncted each one of these planets one by one, first in the lower left quadrant, and then continued with opposition to the planets at the top. So, my life up to now, you could say, has been an almost continuous series of Plutonic aspects. And these are known to be very intense and transformative. So for example, the first planet that Pluto conjuncted was Saturn when I was a baby. And this is when I developed kidney disease, because as I mentioned previously, Pluto-Saturn is associated with disease. Yet interestingly, it seems almost purposive that Mars was the next planet in line in my chart, because Pluto-Mars creates a kind of powerful push to fight something off. So my toddler self fought off the disease that all the doctors were predicting would end in my death. So following this example, you could say that my life up to now has been characterized by certain catharticism, transformation, and death, as Pluto traveled in a similar way through the rest of the row of my planets. And if you think that Pluto is done with me now, think again, because now, as it continues to travel further along in the bottom right corner of my chart, it will start forming squares with all the same planets, those notoriously difficult aspects that bring very challenging intensity. So I've been under the first of these, Pluto-Pluto square, for about 5 years. And the next one coming up is the scariest one in the whole collection of astrological aspects, and that's the big bad Pluto-Saturn square. On a positive note, however, these kinds of Plutonian challenges evolve the person in a very powerful and spiritual way. So that's my one comfort right now in the face of this impending transit. Now I will show you more the arts-based research part of the presentation, and how the various Plutonic archetypes have showed up in my life in the past few years under this Pluto-Pluto square energy. So I've been receiving clairvoyant visions for many years now, and this was one of them. This was Hades, the Greek god of the underworld and the dead. And I saw him a few days after my father passed away last year. So death is a prominent Plutonian theme, and Pluto has just moved into my 4th house of home as well. So this corresponds to an event of a death in the family. Another Plutonic archetype associated with the dead and the afterlife is the Egyptian god Anubis. So one day I was walking down the street and I noticed this random arrangement of black feathers on the ground, shown on the left side. And it looked like some creature to me, maybe a giraffe or something. I'm in the habit of noticing random things, by the way, like this, and taking pictures, because they often later turned into synchronicities. This is actually one of my arts-based research practices. And sure enough, later that evening, I noticed a meme about Anubis online, and I realized, oh, this is who that creature was. And then I found a corresponding artwork here. While traveling through New York State last summer, my eyes fell on this tree on the left side, and it reminded me right away of the Green Reaper. And then I found this corresponding artwork. So you see even the white point on his staff matches the white point on the tree. My best friend also passed away recently, and she lived in that same area of New York State. On the left was a vision I had of a Polynesian god rubbing his hands and smiling like a trickster. I wasn't sure what this vision meant until a friend told me that a volcano in Hawaii had just erupted a few days ago. So I looked up Polynesian gods, and Ulupoka seemed to match this kind of trickster demon. Volcanoes and the volcanic erupted are closely associated with the plutonic element. My friend also remarked that Ulupoka reminded him of the Greek god Pan, the goat or satyr god of wilderness and music. Then he presented to show me this creature he discovered in his kitchen, Pan, that same day. So a funny linguistic connection here. Pluto, on the other hand, is also associated with Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, ecstasy, and ritual madness, which is somewhat similar to Pan. So you see a kind of network of connections, synchronicities developing, where separate archetypes are kind of blending into each other. And this is evident in many archetypal experiences, where this kind of network of connections. As the first planet from the sun, Pluto is associated with the darkest reaches of the solar system. Well, not the furthest now that we know that Eris is the furthest one, but traditionally it's in Pluto. On the left was a vision of Shiva, who showed up to me in this dark form, although he didn't necessarily feel evil. Shiva in Hindu mythology is known as the destroyer in the positive and regenerative universal sense. Again, destruction and regeneration are prominently Plutonian themes. And on the right was a recent vision I had of my own shadow in Carl Jung's sense of the shadow. And it had all this shaggy long hair, and I wondered what it meant. And then I realized it's because I keep cutting my hair short, and I don't like how thick it gets when it grows long. And as Jung described, the shadow is an archetype that holds everything that we try to cut out of the light of our conscious perception to stifle back into the dark unconscious. So from this experience, I realized maybe it's okay to embrace my poofy long hair and not be so insecure about it, to integrate the shadow. The vision of Quetzalcoatl, I think, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, also known as the feathered serpent, and is a Mesoamerican god that part is associated with Pluto. I had this vision around the time I met my friend Ramon, who is of Mexican descent. So through being around his energy, I must have subconsciously tapped into his ancestry in the collective unconscious and saw this god. Ramon also breeds snakes, so there's this connection to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. And finally, at the time, I was also reading D.H. Lawrence's The Plumed Serpent, which is a novel about the author's travels in Mexico that center around the same god. One of the main characters in the book was, of course, named Don Ramon, just like my friend. So a lot of synchronistic connections around the vision. This was an amazing synchronicity that took place a few months after I learned about my Pluto connection. I was traveling in Arizona, and in Flagstaff, I decided to go to this observatory. Here is a picture of me walking up the hill. And basically what ended up happening is that I discovered that I unknowingly ended up at the very place where Pluto was discovered on the anniversary of its discovery. So precise synchronistic alignment in both space and time without me knowing. It's as if Pluto had somehow coordinated this and pulled me to this exact location. Okay, let's go to Neptune now. Here's an interesting synchronicity. I was at Esalen Institute in California, where Richard Tarnas conducted his research in the 70s. And this mermaid photograph, spirit photograph, showed up in the ocean water beside me. So right away, I thought of the sea god Neptune, or Poseidon. And later, I also discovered that there was an exact Sun-Neptune conjunction in the sky at that day. And this is why I joke that Neptune's wearing a sun hat to protect himself from the strong California sun. Richard Tarnas is also, by the way, a Pisces sun, so that's ruled by Neptune. So again, a Sun-Neptune kind of conjunction. And this was his retirement party, by the way, of Esalen. This one is of Saturn, and this is a recent one. I was captivated by this cloud on the left side one day. I took a picture. The same evening, I discovered this artwork in the middle from the cover of the book, The Astrological World of Carl Jung, Liber Novus by Liz Green. And the connections, and the image shows Saturn, by the way. The connections I saw are the winged cup looks exactly like the crossed clouds in my photo. The sky resembles the lamppost. The dark wing resembles the shadowy building in my photo, and also there's clouds and little pictures. So these kind of resemblances is how I spot, it's how the archetype jumps out at me, how I spot them. And then the same evening, Rula posted pictures from the last alchemy conference at the LABRC, where you see all of us raising a cup in toast, just like Saturn. And interestingly, in the book by Liz Green, which where this artwork comes from, she connects Saturn to alchemy, a lesser known planet connected to alchemy. So again, you see a bundle of acausal interconnections, which are how archetypes identify. And just briefly, in the final few slides, I want to contemplate some possible theoretical explanations for astrology. One similarity is you see the interconnected angular aspects that form within a natal chart. You see similar kinds of network systems that are studied in the brain. So for example, integrated information theory of consciousness studies these network complexes and correlates the biggest one to what is conscious in the brain at any given point. So I think astrology works by the same principle. It's basically systems theory. The biggest entangled network of aspects at any given time is what correlates, creates the overall dominant field of influence. And by the way, right now, I just saw this morning a post from an astrologer. There's apparently like 90,000 aspects all in one going on. And finally, I've also found there to be visual resemblances between what is known as epicyclic planet orbitals at the top, which are shown above, and the vibration patterns created by sound frequencies in sand or water, or as they're known as dissipative structures in somatics. So in this sense, planet rotations create resonant vibrational structures. I think as Nick said, the quote he said, time becomes an image. And this is exactly what happens here. It's planets create the same image, but on a larger, lengthier scale. And so I think these images, these vibrational energies are extended in time into both past and present, which is perhaps what gives them their acausal, atemporal, energetic influence over the earth. Okay, thank you.
Wow, Julia, this is fascinating as ever. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing so many wonderful personal experiences and weaving them into this phenomenal presentation. Thank you. And with that, we will be moving